This was a really great conversation with the renegade therapist, Jerry Hyde. Jerry is a shadow work facilitator who says you need to learn to work with your demons, which he knows a lot about because he used to be an addict, and says he learned most of what he knows about human nature from playing in a rock band.
Everyone's got an idea of what a therapist is like, and I've made a brand for myself, almost being counterculture to that, and I'm not oblivious to the fact that all this shit is branding, right? I'm portraying a certain persona that I've got a certain amount of consciousness about, because I'm trying to dismantle the idea of what is a therapist. And that kind of works, because there's a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, yeah, I feel safe sitting in a room with you and your guitars and your tattoos because you're my kind of person.
Jerry now styles himself as the most dangerous therapist in the world. He works mostly with men and has just made a film telling the story of what really goes on in the men's groups he's been leading for decades.
I don't like a lot of the conventional ideas of what therapy is for. For example, healing. Because if I'm a healer, then that means I'm healed, and I have people who are sick. I'm not healed. I'm a work in progress, and I take my wounds as the platform from where I'm working with people. But we'll never know who it touches. It doesn't really matter. To me, what matters is that we show up and we try and be the best men we can be.
It just sounded like a men's group session.
Yeah. This is perfect.
Let's do it.
If there is such a thing as a statement that defines masculinity for me, that's good enough. It's someone who has that dangerousness, but has done enough work on themselves that they're no longer a threat. That was a beautiful balance of the two. It's not the new man model, which is you shouldn't bear arms at all and you should be nice all the time, because that hasn't worked for anyone. None of the women that I've spoken to have said that's what we're looking for, and the men certainly haven't felt satisfied with it. But to bear arms and know how to not use them, that's great to me. That encapsulates that. It's not my favorite word, warrior, but because that's been kind of appropriated in all sorts of ways. But that encapsulates that more beastly energy of a man, but a man who's learned mastery over that beast side, I think is a wonderful thing.
This conversation ranged from masculinity to war and conflict to the potential for psychedelic therapy, and also how it can go wrong.
If ayahuasca is part of your culture and you have a bad experience, talk to anyone. You go and talk to your grandmother, talk to your mum. What was your first ayahuasca experience like? If I sneak off somewhere and do something that's considered a Class A narcotic for my own spiritual development and it flips me out, who the fuck do I talk to? They're not there. I mean, it's beginning to change, and it will change. And there are courses you can now do for psychedelic integration. But there's a bit of catching up to do. And I've probably been guilty in the past of being a bit evangelical about ayahuasca, but I've backed off from that, and I'm much more strident about saying, okay, this has a lot of potential, but do your groundwork before you drop that one on your psyche, and have someone in place to help you to integrate it.
I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And just to let you know, we're starting up our Rebel Wisdom men's weekend retreats again after a long break for COVID.
I didn't know what to expect. To be honest, I was blown away.
Just makes you see how every day you go and make yourself small, and you compromise, and you don't step fully into your potential.
And the next one is February the 18th to the 20th. So check out the details below in the show notes, and maybe see you there. Enjoy the conversation. Jerry, welcome. Thank you. So really looking forward to this. We've been friends for a few years now. It's your debut on Rebel Wisdom. Welcome. Thank you. And maybe let's start with you just introducing yourself. What's your background? And we're going to talk a bit about the film that you've made recently, and then we'll sort of see where the conversation goes. If it's anything like our off-camera conversations, and I'm sure it'll be good. So, but just maybe, so if you'd like to introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about the film, because we'll use that as a kind of starting point and then bounce from there.
Yeah, it's not. Thank you. It's nice that you referred to me as a friend, which is a fucking miracle in itself. Because I think the first time you contacted me, I was really arrogant and kind of flippant and standoffish. And then we met, and I realized that you were coming from the right place. But so it's not an easy question to say, what am I? Because I am very suspicious about being involved in anything. And when we were talking earlier, I noticed how many times you'd say, oh, do you know so-and-so? And I go, well, no, I don't know anyone, because I live in this, I've created this kind of little micro bubble that I feel safe in my little tower, going fuck off to the rest of the world. So I run a small men's group practice, which at the same time, in our culture, is a very big men's group practice because there aren't very many. It's not a lot of competition. I've run 4 men's groups, which I started running men's groups 27 years ago in 1995. And I started running men's groups because I really didn't like men very much. Or I started working in domestic violence because I think I wanted to protect the world from violent men. And then I realized I really liked these guys and understood them and felt a lot of compassion. So I kind of flipped quite quickly. And then I started running just open men's groups. And I'm a psychotherapist. I've got a psychotherapy practice. And I write books. I've made a film that we'll talk about a bit today that's about the men's work that I do. Yeah.
And maybe let's start by talking about what is men's work, or what do men get from men's work. 'Cause it's kind of how we first connected. We've run men's retreats since the beginning of Rebel Wisdom. We used to run, it actually started, we were running a men's circle for a while. And then that kind of developed into a one-day retreat and then into a weekend retreat. And it's something that is still probably the most satisfying event that we run, just seeing what happens when you bring men together and give them permission to be honest with each other and see what comes out, where they're able to go, and how much that means to us as men. Because I don't think there are that many environments in our culture where men have permission to be really honest. And I think, for me, it's something that I would love to see. It still feels kind of countercultural at the moment. And I'd love for it not to feel countercultural. I'd love for it to feel like actually something that is a normal part of, it's a normal part of the culture and doesn't feel like a weird thing that strange people do.
I was talking to my partner in the last few weeks. We made the film together. She's a French filmmaker. And I was saying to her, I notice, I don't know when this changed, but it's only in the last 5 years, and she was very surprised when I told her this, that the men in my men's groups no longer talk about it being a secret. And they don't worry about what would happen if their friends or family found out. So totally agree with you that it's countercultural, but something's shifting very, very slowly in my tiny little world anyway, in that they're not going, fuck, what would happen if I think the concern before was, will my family feel like they failed if they discover that I've fallen into this cult where we talk about feelings, that it would somehow be a kind of negative reflection on their families. And that's changed. I think The Sopranos changed everything. I think it's one of the most pivotal things. When I started as a therapist, I remember going into Barclays Bank in Muswell Hill to open a bank account in the early 90s, and they asked me what I did, and I said psychotherapist, and I remember the woman going, "Oh, you must meet a lot of mad people." And 25 years ago, that was the perception of therapy as a whole. And then The Sopranos came along, and that was just the first of a lot of, the way it filtered into kind of TV and drama and media. And so I think it's more acceptable in general. Men's groups, I still feel that there's a kind of rule breaking that goes on, because what you're invited to do when you enter a men's group is the opposite of what we're allowed to do in the pub. And it's this very unspoken set of rules that means that as long as you talk about football, that's fine. You can talk about work a little bit. Don't talk about feelings, whatever you do. You can talk about your relationship struggles, but in a very limited way. Whereas in a men's group, I mean, there's still some of that. I noticed that in a tea break, generally the conversation is football, so they revert pretty quickly. But when you create a kind of a space, you only need one person to lead the way and start talking about their feelings, and everyone piles in. It's like they just give everyone permission, and it's amazing to me how quickly that social conditioning breaks down once someone takes the lead.
Yeah, and I'm interested how you would join together the two, because you're a therapist. So, but men's groups by themselves, I wouldn't class them as therapy, but there is an interesting kind of
Therapeutic.
they're therapeutic. I think it was actually, I think Jordan Peterson's framing of Carl Rogers' therapy. He saw it as just a truthful conversation oriented towards the good was itself the act of therapy. So in a way, any conversation that is truthful and is oriented towards that, which I think is what you get from a good men's group. But there's also something about giving each other permission as well, which I think is less. So therapy is maybe a little bit more of a feminized one-to-one thing, whereas a men's group perhaps gives us each permission to hear other stories and feel less alone, feel that actually, no, this is a common experience, and to be able to share. I mean, how would you link those two things together?
I mean, the word feminized is good, if contentious. If we're going to use those polarities as reference point, then fuck it, we're stuck with them. I do think there's a kind of a nice irony in that a men's group is kind of a feminine space where at least we're allowed to operate within, these guidelines that. And it's probably David Dada that talked about, the masculine will isolate, the feminine will commune. Well, if that's true, then we're communing, And the rules are different, that need for toughness. I mean, what is therapy? I think being listened to is a big part of therapy as well. And the more I run groups, my oldest group it'll be 22 years old this year. The older they get, I could get hit by a bus. That group would be fine. They'd keep going. They know how to do it. That's the joy for me is in that collective way of working. And I think it's safer than one-to-one therapy because I've got blind spots, so I could work with you for decades and there would be things that I haven't processed in myself or worked through that I'm going to miss. Then in a group, once you get them up to speed and they know how to work, that's the buzz for me when someone cuts across with an angle that I would never have seen and I go, fuck, that's really good. I would never have spotted that. So by safe, I think you're getting that group of people who have your best interest at heart and aren't frightened to challenge you. But is it therapy? I don't care. It's therapeutic. It's the real challenge for me, if there is one, is, and I think we're all quite good at it, is not to get into fixing it. What you should do about, that's a very kind of male thing to do. We love to pull an engine out and pull it to bits. And to not go down the fix route and sit with someone when they're in deep pain and support them through that, I think is that's a really healthy thing that is, really necessary in society. So I'm totally on board with that. It needs to become mainstream. It probably will. I mean, how you do that is back to the fixing it mentality, and I don't ever get very far with that. But you look at, when I'm feeling down about that, I look at what's changed in the last 100 years or so, and I feel a bit more optimistic.
And I mean, the flip side of that as well is like, okay, there is the men need to be more vulnerable, or the benefit of being able to be honest about our feelings in safe environments. But the other side of it for me is, and part of what we do on the retreats, is tapping into that kind of aggression and tapping in, like making space for that kind of more animal side as well, and not shaming that, like bringing that under, as again, Jordan Peterson would say, or the Jungian therapist would say, kind of integrating the shadow in a way, because that's the other side of things that I think I'm always wary whenever the conversation seems to be just, men need to be more vulnerable. It's like, yes, but we also need to integrate that other side of ourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, gender is something I'm terrified of talking about. I don't know why, because I'm not going to get cancelled because I'm not famous enough to get cancelled. And talking about Jordan Peterson always feels like a bit of a confession, like a guilty pleasure. I understand why it upsets people. I also think he says some things that for me have been very important. For example, when he talks about his spin on the Sermon on the Mount, have you seen that one where he talks about, like, why would the meek inherit the earth? That doesn't make any sense. And he looked at the original ancient Greek and Hebrew scriptures and he said, this is a mistranslation. What it originally meant was, blessed are they who bear arms, know how to use them and keep them sheathed. And I thought, that'll do. If there is such a thing as a statement that defines masculinity for me, that's good enough. It's someone who has that dangerousness, but has done enough work on themselves that they're no longer a threat. You know, that was a beautiful balance of the two. It's not the new man model, which is you shouldn't bear arms at all and you should be nice all the time, because that hasn't worked for anyone. You know, none of the women that I've spoken to have said that's what we're looking for, and the men certainly haven't felt satisfied with it. But to bear arms and know how to not use them, that's great to me. Yeah. That encapsulates that. It's not my favorite word, warrior, but because that's been kind of appropriated in all sorts of ways. But that encapsulates that more beastly energy of a man, but a man who's learned mastery over that beast side, I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And it's also about using the kind of natural frustrations that we all feel, which I think in some ways are a kind of conscience, like the frustrations of like, I should have done that, I should have said this, or I wish I'd done this, and actually kind of fully accepting that and then using that as fuel. Like that's kind of your conscience calling out to you to kind of step into a different way of acting, and like really accepting that and using that as kind of a transformational fuel for change in your life.
Yeah, and if you don't recognize it, if you just try and be nice, that darkness is going to leap out on you when you least expect it. You know, that shadow work is at the heart of my own personal work, and I guess that spills onto the people I work with, because it's until you know those, you know, until you've gone into those labyrinths and faced those minotaurs, they're really scary. When you go in and shine light on, they're only this big. It's that kind of cliche, but well, sometimes they're enormous, but at least you can befriend them or utilize some of that energy. You know.
And how have you ended up where you are now? Like, what's your background in terms of that relationship with yourself?
I mean, I went to boarding school. That sent me in a certain direction, or compressed a lot. I came from quite a nice dysfunctional family. Oh, right. Yeah, I came from a very nice dysfunctional family. I remember I had a drug problem in my late 20s, and I went to a 12-step group, and I remember sitting in this room in Earl's Court and looking around and thinking, well, I really know why you guys are here. What the fuck am I doing? I'm from Windsor. I went to public school. What am I doing here? We had a garden and a drive, and we went on skiing holidays, and you guys, I'm mythologizing now. I don't remember accurately, but it's that sense of you're off kind of Glaswegian council estates and you have the shit kicked out of you your whole life. It makes sense why I'm as fucked up as anyone in this room. So that was probably the beginning of unpacking the niceness of the family and the family lie, which is so English, the kind of what goes on, behind closed doors. And, we weren't the worst, we weren't the best, but there was alcoholism and a lot of repression in the family. There was some sexual abuse, not by the family to me, but I think there's been sexual abuse in my family for about 100 years or more. Then I went to public school, which is a can of worms in itself. Then I came out and kind of rebelled against all of that and, lived in squats and took drugs and played in a rock and roll band, and which is where I always say I learnt my group work skills, because it's true. If you understand the group dynamics in a rock and roll band, you're going to understand it in a men's group. And then in my late 20s, I went to therapy because I had stopped taking drugs and I was not coping very well with being sober. And it was like within 2 sessions, I think something clicked. It was like, okay, I could do this. I hadn't really known what I wanted to do up till then, but some kind of instinct. And also there was a practicality, which is my life's been a complete clusterfuck so far. And this suddenly makes all of those disasters into qualifications rather than bad things. And I kind of went from there. And the form or the shape that I have now comes as a result of what we were talking about just now, the kind of shadow side of becoming a nice, well-behaved kind of Muswell Hill borders BMW driving psychotherapist, and then blowing that all to pieces by having an affair with someone I really shouldn't have, my marriage falling apart, and realizing that the fact that I'd sworn I wouldn't be the father that my father had been wasn't enough. I remember seeing a shaman. I was dabbling with all sorts of things in my late 20s, and I saw a shaman. She went, "Oh, you're a line breaker." And I was like, "What's a line breaker?" And she said, "Well, in our culture, Native American culture, we believe that every 7 generations someone comes along who kind of patches up all the shit from the last 7 generations to make it better for the next." And I went away quite smug, going, "That's great, I'm a line breaker." And then when I hit 42 and the wheels fell off, it's like, what was all that shit about being a line breaker? I'm just as bad as my dad. And then a few years later, I realized, well, that's where you have to go. It's not enough to go, "I'm better than you." You actually have to go, "No, I'm your son, and I am of you, and I have so much more of you than I ever would have wished for, but it's there. And if I'm going to break this line, I have to take ownership of that." You can't just go, "It's not for me."
And we're going to talk about a film that you have already made called Make Me a Man.
What does being a man mean to you?
That's a bollocks question, isn't it? A man is has a sensitivity, but also has a strength that he knows his own strength and chooses wisely when to use it.
This process, this work that we do now is part of my life. It's so interwoven. I can't think of not coming and talking to other men about how I feel and what's going on in my life.
I've pulled out of myself resources and skills, and I've learned how to express myself better and how to communicate my emotions and experience to other people. But all those things are really valuable.
Being able to be a different kind of man for my son is the thing I'm probably most proud of. I mean, just to be able to, to be there when my son cries, to be able to laugh about what it means to be a man, it's amazing stuff. And so I will just think, I want to be a role model for you. And he's an amazing person, as my daughter is. He will be a fabulous father. And so that's one of the things I will think on my deathbed, that I killed off some of this shit, hopefully, with my generation.
What's the reason for making it?
There's different reasons. One was I'd been approached over the years by film companies wanting to film, and I'd always thought, well, how do we do that? Because you bring a film crew in and immediately it's going to change. So I never let that happen. And then one night I was just sitting in a group and I looked around, and because I work with a lot of people in the arts, I was like, hold on, we're a film crew. We can do this. So it was literally on a Tuesday night. I was like, who's free on Saturday? So we started filming interviews. And then I realized I can't do this because if I do it, it's going to be very defensive. I just instinctively could feel this is going to be a defensive, we're not all bad, just because we're men. And my partner is a more established, much more established, well, I'm not established at all, filmmaker. And so I invited her to come on board because I thought this is what's necessary, is it needs to be from a man and a woman. And so she got involved, and that's how the resulting film came about. But I think also it was a recognition that I'm at capacity and have been for years now. I can only work with so many people, and it was like, how do we incentivize more men to do this work? You know, if we put the film out and one person sees it and creates a group, it's been worth doing. And also, I'd been asking guys, or I'd given up actually, but I had for a while been asking guys, so who are the male role models now? And you just get met with a kind of wall of blank faces. And I thought, well, maybe it's you. Maybe they aren't out there. Maybe it's just guys who are just day-to-day guys, you know, who have chosen to work on themselves for 15 or 20 years. Maybe we just put that out. It's not that we are the role model and this is the way, but it's a reference point in a world where there aren't many. So it seems to be working.
And what is it about, just before we go on more to the film, what is it about men's work specifically that you wanted to show, that you thought needed to be out there?
I think the guys like I say, they were chosen at random. And initially, at least, that we did different batches, but they were chosen at random. It was to show that when you do some work, that you will be a more rounded human being, and it's attractive. You know, I think that's appealing to where do we see the results of that therapeutic journey? You know, it's you know this and I know this. We don't do this work in public. You know, by its confidential nature, it's done behind closed doors or in a wood somewhere or TPO or something. So I think to say, look, this is the result. This is who you could be if your relationship's not working out, if your family's not working out, if your business isn't working out, if your internal world isn't working out. This is the product, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel very similarly. Like, that's the thing I would love to crack, is showing some of those moments. And it's very difficult because when you bring a camera in, it changes the nature of the experience that people are having. But I've felt so many times, like during a retreat or during the groups, I would love if people could see this. Just when this kind of spontaneous camaraderie or support or just honesty or something tangible kind of comes in that just feels so nourishing. And we've called it vitamin M, like the sense of vitamin M. And it's like we're craving it. And I think there are fewer and fewer opportunities to have that. And obviously, all male environments can also go toxic as well as that. But there can be, if they're kind of held in the right way, be something quite magical about it as well. And it's like, how can you show that, and how can you kind of give people the opportunity to experience it and then look for more of that authenticity in their relationships outside? So it's also, that for me is like, I run more workshops, you do kind of evening sessions, but it's like, for me, I see it as a place where you can experiment with new ways of being. You can be more honest, you can be more authentic, you can say the things that you haven't been saying elsewhere, and then use that as that. It's like developing a tool or developing a skill that then hopefully will make the rest of your relationships better. That's kind of how I see it. It's like, could you create kind of these liminal spaces where we can change our habits and become more, give ourselves more potential tools out in the world.
Yeah, and you know, if you told me nearly 30 years ago that most of my work would be talking to particularly men about their relationship struggles, I mean, that's the number one area that people are struggling in. And the families that are falling apart, and the kids are growing up with absent fathers. You know, it's got to be. Where else are we going to do this? I mean, this should be taught in schools, really. But until it is, we're going to have to pick up the pieces with older guys.
Yeah. There's a fascinating organisation, actually called I think it was called originally the Making of Men, in Australia, and they managed to get into kind of the school system. But they were also doing initiation work with fathers and sons. So the son would be able to see their father going through some kind of deep experience, and that would kind of be a bonding, see their father push to the limit in some way, and then they would also go through that experience together.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this till I'm blue in the face. You know, we've lost all of our initiation rituals, and you know, health and safety wouldn't allow most of them for good reason. Some of the ones I've read about, but it's not about hanging people off hooks. It's about, I mean, one of my favorite ones I ever heard about, I can't remember which tribe it was, but one where the boy, when he hit puberty, would be taken out into the woods, blindfolded and left on a tree stump all night on his own to hear whatever was prowling around, and he had to sit there and, you know, not move. And they'd come in the morning and take the blindfold off, and he would realize his father had been sat next to him all night. You know, that's beautiful. And that's all it takes. You know, some kind of ritualized thing. Where a father says, you are worthy of this, I think. And I didn't get that. And I remember when I hit 18, again, I'm probably mythologizing, but I kind of remember waking up on my 18th birthday and going, shit, I'm just the same. Nothing changed. Well, maybe it happens when I'm 21, and then waking up on my 21st. It's like, well, that didn't happen. I don't think I felt a sense of myself as a man that I can trust till I was in my 50s. So like last week, you know, recently, I mean, very recently, you know, I was lost. And through some of the work I've done, I realized that I'd actually made an unconscious deal with my mum never to be a man, because she was so hurt by my dad. It's like, the most loyal thing I can do for you is never become a man, because you hate men so much and you've been so hurt by men. And that didn't help anyone. That didn't help me. That didn't help the women I was trying to have relationships with. It certainly wouldn't, if I hadn't addressed it, wouldn't have helped me in my role as a father, because I've got 2 daughters and a stepdaughter and 2 stepsons. So the denial of it was useless, but it would have helped if someone had said to me, right, you're a man now. You know, this is a responsibility and you're going to have to take, rather than, oh God, I don't know how, I've got this kind of man-shaped body and I'm trying to do a man-shaped job and a man-shaped relationship, but I haven't really got the internal experience. And, you know, I would say that's the problem in leadership in the world at the moment, is you've got a lot of people in man suits, you know, trying to do stuff that they're not actually qualified for, because they haven't grown up yet. And I do point the finger at masculinity. I don't know that there's such a problem with women becoming adult. I don't understand why that is. Maybe because they have their own physical experiences. Watching my daughters go through puberty, I looked at fucks. You know, I just wanted to dry hump everything, and my voice started cracking. But the kind of transformation that a woman goes through into puberty, you know, in one end and then out the other end in menopause, is so profound. Maybe that's part of it. We don't have that same kind of experience, and we don't have to navigate pain in the same way.
And in the film, you also bring in the First World War. Makes a real appearance there. You've got kind of the visit to the trenches, and this kind of sense, I guess, that you have, that this kind of experience left an awfully long shadow on England, Britain in particular. Yeah, do you want to talk me through that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I make a point that I'm not sure if it holds water, because I'd have to go back and ask people what men were like before the First World War. But the point I make is that the way that people managed the First and the Second World War was by going silent. You know, you had, I guess you could say, the men's movement, men's groups, was very influenced by like the Vietnam War, where you got veterans groups and people started to meet, but you didn't have that with the First and Second World Wars.
Yeah, I guess if people don't know, so Mankind Project, which is probably one of the biggest men's organizations, actually came out of they were Vietnam vets who kind of came together and supported each other, and yeah, that obviously played quite a big role, because it kind of merged, I guess, with the kind of new age self-help culture, warrior king, magician, lover, all of that sort of stuff that was happening in the 70s and 80s. But yeah, it obviously didn't happen.
No, so prior to that, you had guys who were very, very, you know, traumatized by what they'd experienced, coming back not being able to integrate those experiences or connect. There's an interesting piece of data that I read about in one of Sebastian Junger's books, where he pointed out that I think the lowest PTSD rates of any country in the world or military in the world is in Israel, which was kind of surprising at face value, but it's because everybody goes to the military and then everyone comes back, everyone understands what everyone's been through. Whereas when you got people split from their society, sent off to an experience that can't be described, who then come back, and people don't know, can't comprehend it, then you get silence and traumatized people who are managing that in silence. And so I feel that I was raised by men who were part of that silence, and women, because women wouldn't talk about it and learn not to express their emotions. Like I say, maybe everyone was completely silent before those wars, but they felt very much part of my upbringing. The men who raised me had been through those experiences, or hadn't come back, so the gaps left with the absent men. And there was also a question, a kind of naive question in a way, but one that I was troubled by, which is this the ultimate rite of passage? And I talk to people like Sebastian and veterans in this inquiry for myself, do you really need to have gone into battle to be able to be eligible to be called a man? And is this why we're all so lost, because we ain't got a war, And I really hoped that wasn't the case. And I've come out of it going, no, that's not the case. But I kind of needed to answer it because my grandfather was my hero and he'd been in a war, and I somehow felt less than, and like I'd missed out on something that would have made up for the lack of ritual or rite of passage. Mm. I think that the conclusion I came to through making the film was, no, you don't need to go to an external war. It's pretty better that we don't. But we do need to go to the inside, conflicts that we all carry, and we need, it's a war of sorts.
Mm. And Sebastian Junger, was that Restrepo?
Yeah, he did Restrepo, and Restrepo was men's group in a trench. He did The Perfect Storm, which was men's group in a fishing boat. Mm. He was very supportive of the film.
So Restrepo was with Tim Hetherington, I think, as well. And as you say, his focus was to make a war film that was looking at the bonds between men that grow up within while men are at war, rather than kind of focused on the enemy and kind of that kind of cliche. It was really what happens and what are the experiences like. And you can see just the simple, like we all know the suicide rates of men who've left the army are huge. And I think, a lot of that I'm sure is the PTSD and the experience, the kind of overwhelming experiences that they've gone through while they're out there. But I also I'm pretty sure that a large part of it is that sort of a sense of that level of camaraderie and that level of purpose and that level of kind of connection that they had then is very difficult to achieve in the kind of civilian.
That's what I guess, if I was going to boil it down to anything, that's what I'm trying to create and provide in men's groups, is that camaraderie. I think it's a very healthy thing that unfortunately is often most commonly found in war. But it's the thing that always took me to read books about the war, was the camaraderie. And I remember the first time I went out to the trenches, it didn't make sense, but I remember getting there, because a lot of it, or especially back 30 years ago, was still very preserved. You have a lot of barbed wire and stuff lying around, and trenches. And I remember getting there going, where is everyone? Where have they all gone? I was looking, that's what I was seeking, was that love that you read time and time again. People say, look, I've got great family and I've got great friends, but there's no one I've ever been as close to as the people that I sat in a shell hole with. I envied that. There was a deep, profound longing for that. And whether we've achieved it or not, I doubt it by comparison to people who've been through that kind of hell, but definitely an essential part of the work that I do in bonding men's groups is I take them through ordeals. Now, that's not an ordeal of being under shellfire, but it's the ordeal of taking them out in the woods, not giving them any food or shelter for days at a time, and sitting in the rain. And that That makes people tight and respect each other. It's like, well, if you can sit through this, then I can sit through this. Yeah. Tim Hetherington also did an amazing book called Sleeping Soldiers. I don't know if you've seen that. That's really beautiful, where he photographed the guys in Restrepo while they were asleep, and they do look like babies. You know, they've got that totally. It's amazing to see soldiers totally unguarded, and you see another kind of version of that masculine image. You know, it's very sensitive and very delicate.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the camaraderie and wanting to kind of recreate that in your work, because I feel that's so essential and so necessary. And one of the things that comes up quite a lot, the things that I hear quite a lot from men who come to the retreats, and also from women, is that, and I think a mistake that a lot of people have in this culture is to try and put too much onto their intimate relationships. So this sense that because the intimate relationship, because of kind of Hollywood and romantic comedies and stuff, like everything is now placed on this kind of dyad relationship, and it can't hold it. And so I think it's, in my experience, like having those close male friendships is absolutely essential for the functioning of your intimate relationships as well, because you can't load too much onto it. And as we're saying, something I hear a lot from female friends is that they meet a guy who's they are attracted to. He's got a lot of friends. He's got a lot of seems to have a lot going on in his life. And then a couple of years later, it's like he doesn't really go out. Doesn't seem to have his male friendships. It's just me and him. And she often finds him less attractive. It's kind of like, he's not the guy that I first met. Because I think as men, we often allow many of our relationships to wither, or we don't maintain them in
no, I think that's a really good point, and you're absolutely right. You know, we're all putting too much onto one relationship, and there's another thing that's very hard to quantify. Yeah, you hear a lot in the therapy world the promises of life-changing experiences. The ones I've had have never been the ones that were promised. There was one that I absolutely would say was life-changing, though, that no one would have noticed. You know, there was no ayahuasca involved. There was no screaming or shouting. It was totally internal. So I was in my first ever training year, counseling training. As usual, there were 23 women and 2 guys in the group. And I came in on the Monday morning and, still hadn't woken up properly, and sat down in whatever seat was available. And the facilitator said, right, pair up with someone. So I looked to my left and I'm sitting next to the guy. And they were like, right, now find a way to physically hold each other. I was like, 23 fucking women and I pick you. And I remember he sat down on the floor, like with his legs and his arms open, and I lay with my back against his chest and he held me. And it was fucking amazing. It was a quality I'd never experienced. I don't think I'd ever been touched by a man. That's not what my family does. My father would shake my hand when he dumped me at boarding school, but there was nothing physical. My grandfather would occasionally carry me on his back when I get tired, when we go for a walk, but we didn't hug, even though we were very close. So I think that was the first physical experience I had with a man. And it felt incredibly safe. And I remember at the time thinking, actually, this is really good, because if you had breasts, I would be really self-conscious and I'd be worried about, oh my God, how do I do this without you thinking I'm some kind of creep or whatever. There's a freedom in this because I'm kind of pretty solid in my heterosexuality or my homosexuality. I know where my boundaries are within that, and I feel safe in this. And I know you're not going to think I'm hitting on you, and I know you're not hitting on me. You're just a guy who's holding me. And that's the essence of it. And I wouldn't know how to bottle it. I wouldn't know how to really describe it, but just that male strength that's different from a female strength, There was a purity to it that really began to untangle some of my dislike of men, my fear of men. It's like, oh, there's something positive here. I didn't know that. Something pure and positive and good. Yeah, I like it. I'd like more of this, and I'd like to breed more of this. So we do a lot of touch, and it's inevitable, especially if I do a retreat. I do retreats with my existing groups on the whole. Someone's going to get hugged pretty quickly. Someone's going to get lifted up and held and rocked. And, we're going to do a lot of that kind of stuff. Most evenings when we meet, that's how we greet each other, is with a hug. But, that physicality is a beautiful thing.
I also want to talk a little bit about psychedelics, because we both got an interesting shared interest in psychedelics and belief in their power for kind of self-insight and transformation to some degree, although I'm a little bit skeptical. We were talking before we started recording, so I know that we're kind of thinking along similar lines on this, but I've always been both incredibly optimistic about them as kind of tools of insight, but also concerned as well, because I feel like a lot of the time the kind of insights that you get are very hard to integrate compared to what you can get with a workshop, a group workshop, or with a therapeutic process where I think we can integrate at our own pace. Whereas often with ayahuasca or psilocybin or any of these kind of more intense psychedelics, often I feel like the download that we get is too much to integrate. And I especially feel like a lot of people who are very keen on those, the kind of the more, the sort of psychedelic culture more generally, I think overvalues that kind of revelation that they get and undervalues the integration work, the slow integration work.
Yeah, I can't remember the name. I'm very good at forgetting people's names. The guy who started MAPS.
Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies is Rick Doblin.
That's it. I'm pretty sure it was Rick Doblin was talking about, never before have we seen something that had such momentum in terms of human potential and psychology that was prohibited, that was just shut down, 55 years ago. And it's suddenly being opened up again as MAPS is doing a lot of work with MDMA and mushrooms. And we're getting a lot of research here and in Israel and Canada and America. But it just got stopped for half a century. And so I totally agree with you. I'm a big fan of the potential of psychedelics and very concerned about the fact we have a very limited infrastructure of how to manage these extraordinarily powerful tools. That's something that I guess the psychedelics have just escaped once again from the lab, but we haven't got the people who are trained up to help people. And as we were talking earlier, if it's part of your culture, again, I think maybe it was Michael Pollan was talking about this, guy who wrote How to Change Your Mind. When there's very rarely any problems with any substance, including alcohol, when it's used ritualistically, when it's used with a certain procedure or ceremony, and where there's a guiding character who oversees that. It's very rare that you'll get any problems with that. When anything is used indiscriminately, it can get messy quite quickly. And because we don't have that culture, again, I was saying to you earlier, if ayahuasca is part of your culture and you have a bad experience, talk to anyone. You go and talk to your grandmother, talk to your mum. What was your first ayahuasca experience like? If I sneak off somewhere and do something that's considered a Class A narcotic for my own spiritual development and it flips me out, who the fuck do I talk to? They're not there. I mean, it's beginning to change, and it will change. And there are courses you can now do for psychedelic integration, but there's a bit of catching up to do. And I've probably been guilty in the past of being a bit evangelical about ayahuasca, but I've backed off from that, and I'm much more strident about saying, okay, this has a lot of potential, but do your groundwork before you drop that one on your psyche, and have someone in place to help you to integrate it. And before, when everything stopped with COVID, before COVID, I was running an annual ayahuasca retreat, but with that, I would do a lot of interviewing. You couldn't just buy your way in. I would always interview people and I'm quite good at assessing if people are in the right place so far. And we'd do quite a bit of preparation, and then they would go off and do a 4-day vision quest where they would sit without food or shelter in the woods just to get the fuck away from phones or even talking about it. I think over talking about it can also be a problem. You go into your head and try and make sense of it. So just giving people space, just sit and be with, allow. It's like digesting a heavy meal, you know. Just give it some time and then come back. We'll spend another couple of days helping you assimilate this. But even that's not the same as living somewhere where it's legal and everyone understands what you're managing and trying to process.
Yeah. And I've been part of, or been connected to sort of various psychedelic communities. I actually met Ali, my colleague, originally at this Breaking Convention, which is the big psychedelic festival that happens every 2 years in the UK. I think we met in 2013. And what I found around those communities is a lot of people who seem to kind of fetishize the high, fetishize the psychedelic experience, but understandably, but don't really do the work to integrate themselves, I guess. And I've really tried to kind of advise and push people towards some of these more transformational retreats, therapeutic trainings and stuff, particularly with my kind of mentor, Raffia. Like, I think a lot of their work, the first time I did a retreat with him, I got, by the end of like 6 or 7 days, I was as high as I've been off any psychedelic experience, just from the experience of kind of really delving into my conditioning, of really processing a lot of it through dialogue, through some cathartic release, some sort of breath work practice. And it was genuinely extraordinary. And the paradox I find is that at the heart of the psychedelic vision, at the heart of the psychedelic kind of ideal, is Aldous Huxley talked about the doors of perception. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it truly is, infinite, which is obviously from William Blake originally. But that shows you don't need the substances. Yeah. Like, that points beyond the substances. And yet I feel so much of the psychedelic community is fixated on the substances and not so much in like, well, how do we learn to live more from this space? How do we learn to kind of clear out more of the conditioning, more of the kind of woundedness, more of the whatever it is that stops us from experiencing the world in this way on a more regular basis?
Well, you know, we've created a pain-phobic culture, haven't we? So the idea of a magic pill that sorts all your shit out is so appealing. And I've often had people say, well, ayahuasca is 10 years of therapy in one night. And it is. But it's 10 years of therapy in one night. I mean, how the fuck are you going to process? That's going to take a long time if you really want to benefit from it, because that's a huge download. That's not a fix-it. That's not a cure-all. That's 10 years of therapy in one night. So it's...
And if you don't integrate it, then you lose.
Yeah, you're going to... It's like overeating, you know. Yeah. You know, you can't process it. So 6 years or more now since, almost to the day, 6 years since I last drank ayahuasca. And I'm kind of warming up for it again, but very cautiously. You know, it's a heavy thing. And I've never had a bad experience. I've had incredibly challenging experiences, and it's always been an ordeal. But it's not been dark. It's always been very enlightening. And it has helped with my more conventional therapy, you know, because it's allowed me to, you know, I can understand why MDMA helps veterans with PTSD. It helps you into places that are just, you're so fucking wounded that all your defenses are going, no. And it helps to kind of lubricate those doors so you can go in. But I agree with you. I think there's probably nowhere that I've been on psychedelics that I couldn't have got to or haven't got to completely sober. And I've needed to do the work when I have been sober to make sense. You know, with Iboga, it took me years. I thought Iboga was a complete waste of time. You know, I did it, and for about 4 or 5 years, I thought, well, I didn't do anything. And then I realized that being told not to do a boga was actually an incredibly, it was like, you're enough. You don't need to do these things. I missed that profound message, which I never got from my dad, that I was always looking for from my dad. You are enough. Because I was so disappointed that I didn't get all the bells and whistles. So it's often the boring stuff that's actually more profound. Like being held by a man. That was as transformative as any ayahuasca experience in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite hopeful about MDMA therapy. I think that definitely feels more easily integrated. It's not quite so overwhelming as a huge ayahuasca experience or a huge psychedelic experience. And it's also not just about the experience. So MDMA therapy, as you said before, like MAPS have been really pioneering it in the US. And the emphasis is on the therapy as well as the MDMA. The MDMA is kind of the catalyst, but the idea is that by taking the MDMA, it allows us to go into traumatic memories, process stuff that otherwise would trigger us into a kind of fight or flight response. And so it's kind of more of a crutch through it, rather than the idea like with a huge ayahuasca dose or a heroic mushroom dose that we will get the download and I guess carry ourselves through the experience. So at least with the MDMA therapy, and I find it fascinating as well that I believe that even like the British Legion are interested in MDMA therapy because there's so many squaddies, so many kind of soldiers who come back with PTSD, and there are very few therapeutic interventions that work for PTSD. It's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. So this is one of the most hopeful areas that MAPS have really been pushing it in the US. It's been shown to have extraordinary effects on treatment-resistant trauma. And that could be, I think we're in a really exciting time.
Yeah, and they're doing the responsible thing in that they're offering a training so that people can become facilitators and integrators.
Yeah.
I had a go. I was a bit of a have-a-go MDMA therapist about 10 years ago. And it was very effective, but I just didn't feel comfortable because I was giving people, allegedly, a Class A street drug with unknown properties. And I thought, well, if I could give them clean, pure MDMA, I would go all out on this, but I can't give people dirty street drugs. It's just not. People would say, well, none of it's ethical, but in my sense of ethics, giving people street drugs isn't ethical. But I totally agree with you. I think it's a very powerful, another powerful tool, used in that way.
Yeah. And I think we're in a really interesting time, and that's obviously one of the huge growth areas is psychedelic therapy. And I guess I'd like to kind of return to the film and where you might be going next. Like, what do you think? Where do you want to put most of your energy? And what is your kind of vision for the film that we've been talking about? Make Me a Man. Is that coming out in the UK? Can people see it?
The film's available anywhere through our website, which is makemeaman.com. You can stream it. You can download it. As far as it coming out anywhere, we've got a distributor. Well, it goes out on a video on demand platform in France. So my partner's French. She's better at that shit than I am. I'm not a very good salesman or hustler. But that's the dream, and it's been incredibly well received in France. I don't know that it's like I was saying earlier. I don't think it's about the country. I think they're very hungry for that kind of work there. And they've been very receptive. And it's, I think we were both quite frightened. You talk about masculinity or men, and there's always that fear of, we're just going to get the shit kicked out of us. That just has not happened. And that's really nice. For obvious reasons, it's nice not to have the shit kicked out of you, but no one's attacked us. It's been very well received in the press in France. I would, I'm going to keep the word of mouth thing is a nice route, to be honest. We had a lot of meetings earlier on with different networks and what have you, but the word of mouth thing for a project like this, I think is really good. And I hope that someone here picks it up and it gets a broader, because it's obviously for me, for you, it's a really important subject. And if it inspires people, then of course we want as many people to see it as possible. And that's the direction I'm interested in going in, because you're reaching a mass. I can only reach 60, 70 people a month on my own in a room in Tottenham. But the more people we can show the potential of, whether it's plant medicine or MDMA or conventional talking therapy or men's groups or whatever, I think people need to go beyond any residue of the outdated world. You must meet a lot of mad people kind of notion. Yeah, everyone's got, Sopranos is guilty of this as well. Everyone's got an idea of what a therapist is like, and I've made a brand for myself, almost being counterculture to that. I'm not oblivious to the fact that all this shit is branding, right? I'm portraying a certain persona that I've got a certain amount of consciousness about, because I'm trying to dismantle the idea of what is a therapist. My idea of a therapist is based on the one I was sent to when I was a kid, who was a guy in Richmond in a tweed suit, who asked me questions that were so fucking transparent that I was like, really? Do you think I'm that stupid? I'm going to fall for that? Do you hear voices a lot? I do, actually. But so my idea of what a therapist was, I think, has probably informed how I've tried not to be. And that kind of works, because there's a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, yeah, I feel safe sitting in a room with you and your guitars and your tattoos, because you're my kind of person. So not that there's one way, but I think to put that stuff, anything out there into the world that encourages people to work on themselves or makes them think, maybe that's not such a terrible thing. Maybe, there's that whole debate in the therapy world. Do you call the people you work with your client or your patient? I definitely call them my clients. I don't see people as sick. I don't think you need to be sick or fucked up. We're all fucked up. You don't need to be ill or unwell to want to grow. What do you need to have a sports injury before you go to the gym? People go to the gym because they want to maintain a healthy body. Well, going to therapy or a men's group is exactly the same thing for me. Go to a men's group, stay fit, stay healthy.
So what is a therapist for you? What is?
Therapist is a companion. I think it's not someone, the minute someone says, follow me, you're fucked. That's my suspicious mind coming like, why would I follow you? And why would you follow me is even more important. I've got that responsibility. I've got to show you the way. That's not a responsibility I want. And why would I know what the way is for you? Yeah, I might have some clues as to what we might work on. But no, I like companionship, because it's like, okay, let's walk into the dark forest together. Let's go get lost together. That feels much better than being on your own in the dark forest. If you're with someone, I go, well, which way should we go? That to me is my job. That's what I'm offering. I don't like the idea of experts. Osho said, where there's certainty, there's no growth. And so the minute you claim to be an expert, you just lost it, in my view. Expertise is nice, but there's something of a conclusion in an expert or someone who says, I'll show you the way because I know the way. But yeah, let's get on this ride together and see, we can kind of hold each other's hands if it gets really scary. But my client is the expert, if there is someone. And my old bodywork teacher, Stanley Kellerman, he was a dry bastard and not very romantic, but I remember him saying love. He was a scientist, he was a biologist, so he was very kind of cold. He said, love as an action is the willingness to educate your partner as to who you are. And that's brilliant to me. It's like, okay, so that's what love really looks like. Something observable rather than some amorphous thing. It's that willingness to, I'm going to teach you about myself, and if you teach me about yourself, then we've got a chance at a relationship. And that applies to the therapeutic relationship. I'm ignorant until you, the client, have taught me about yourself. And if you're willing to spend several years telling me everything you know about yourself, I can then hold that and I can reflect it back to you, and you make me a good therapist. When you first walk in the room, I'm not useless, but I'm not very good. And if you walk in the room 5 years later and you've come and seen me for that time, I'm probably going to be quite good. But that's down to you. So it's, yeah, I like to dismantle that kind of hierarchical thing. You know, I like Osho, but I'm a bit suspicious about the guru. But, you know, and I've worked with enough therapists, some very, very good therapists, to see and got very close to them. I don't mean as a client, I mean as a colleague, and got very close to a lot of very good therapists to realize just how fucked up and batshit they are. And that's fine, as long as you're open about that. And I'm open about that. You know, I can be really unstable. I definitely have on a bad day what would probably qualify as mental health issues. I can go to some very dark places, and that's the meat of those are the tools that I work with. I don't for 1 minute pretend to be, you know, if I've got a brand, I'm the fucked up therapist, right? Because I think that's trustworthy. Don't trust anyone who says they've got it sorted. Run away, leave the room immediately. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're saying that you hope that there'd be a shift in terms of kind of how a lot of this stuff is seen. And I wonder whether the pandemic has sort of opened that door. I mean, you hear so many people quitting their jobs, this sense of people looking for something more meaningful. And I think, obviously, the lockdown and the kind of experience of being in COVID times has brought a lot of people really up against their limitations. Sort of it's confronted people. I think it was Jamie Wheel that talked about kind of the pandemic as a apocalypse meaning revealing. That's literally the translation of the word, is the revealing. And it revealed how strong your relationships are, how good your relationship is. If you're kind of locked down with your family, like how good are those relationships? Right. How meaningful is your work when all of the kind of distractions are stripped away? And I think a lot of people have come face to face with the fact that they do need to change certain things in their lives. They do need to kind of work on themselves. And so I'm hopeful that that's the case, not from a sense of lack, but from a sense of people wanting more, wanting better. I know personally, like having the men's retreats that we were doing taken away. Like the last one we did was in February 2020, and then like it's really felt like a huge gap of not having that kind of meaningful human contact and seeing the kind of shifts and seeing the experience that a lot of the guys have had. But yeah, do you think that the pandemic might be changing things and the kind of growth area for people who are offering that?
Yeah, I think so. I read in The Guardian, back to psychedelics, I read in The Guardian a few weeks ago that where people were microdosing LSD and psilocybin before, kind of, you know, the Silicon Valley type thing for creatives and what have you. Now it's something that people are turning to for mental health reasons.
Microdosing for kind of productivity and creativity.
It used to be for productivity and creativity, but now it's just because everyone's so fucking stressed, and, you know, it definitely helps. You know, I've microdosed for 6 or 7 years now, and I definitely found it helpful during lockdown to, you know, it always helps me regulate my kind of mood pattern. In terms of people seeking therapy, I mean, I've never been busier. You know, I did very well from COVID, sorry. You know.
Survivor's guilt.
Yeah, no, you know, my practice boomed, and I filled another whole men's group. You know, I've had far more inquiries, not that I run, that a colleague of mine runs, that I just stream them in his direction. And that's the plan, is to get more and more of the guys I work with up to speed to run groups. So the demand's definitely growing there. And I guess, yeah, I mean, this, you know, talking to clients of mine who are therapists or colleagues who are therapists, it's across the board. So people don't generally look for help when they're happy. No one ever walked into my practice room, and when I said, "Why are you here?" they went, "Because everything's great." You know, it's when the wheels are falling off, and the wheels just fell off massively. And looking ahead, it looks like they're going to fall off even more with climate change. So I think the underlying stress and anxiety, you know, I can't remember who it was that said it at the beginning of the first lockdown, but we've just come out of a kind of 70-year cushion, which is probably the coziest the human race has ever experienced. You know, from the Second World War till COVID and Brexit, you and I, have been born into that, and suddenly things went shit-shaped, and it's not looking like they're going to get better in a hurry. So that will tend to make people get a bit more existential and curious. I think that's a good thing. I'm not sure that climate change is such a good thing. But.
Yeah, there's a great line from one of Leonard Cohen's songs. Every heart to love will come, but like a refugee. Which I thought was fabulous. It's like, and I think there's something in, I feel like our personality structures, the personality structure that we got from childhood, from adolescence, particularly if it's a successful personality structure, like kind of quite alpha, I feel like that can get us to age 30. It often won't get us further than that. And I feel like a lot of the people that I see, a lot of the, like, that's when your life crises come up, like major failure in a job or of a relationship or something like that. That's often when people come to therapy and realize, shit, I need to be more authentic in the way that I'm relating to people, or I'm living from my parents' expectations and what I want to do with my life, or my school's expectations, or my society expectations. It's not what I really want. And so, yeah, I love that sense. Every heart to love will come, but like a refugee after kind of the failure of, but that's going to happen to all of us, which is why paradoxically, a lot of kind of addicts or people who've gone through a lot of these early life, often if they're kind of, they become addicts early in their lives and they've reached the bottom of the barrel quicker than others, often they're kind of, they've gone through that process. They've gone through that process of kind of death and rebirth. I think unless you were extraordinarily lucky with your parents, all of us go through to one degree or another, or exist in kind of quiet desperation, numbing the pain with alcohol or drugs or whatever, and don't go through that process. Like that process, I think we all have to go through, or we all avoid going through, and then we pay the price for avoiding.
Yeah, I'm super glad that I had a lot of fun in my 20s, and then I crashed and burned, and it made me face some shit really quite early in life and become a therapist quite early in life. So I'm appreciative of how much time I've had, and hopefully I'll have another 10, 20, 30 years to kind of keep growing this.
Yeah. Do you feel that you're an elder now?
I do when I try and get out of bed in the morning. I guess so. That's a good question. I mean, again, Stanley Kellerman, my bodywork teacher, he broke life down into 4 stages. He said there's infant, there's alpha adult, there's deeper adult, and then there's aged. And I guess I'm, competitive and aggressive and ambitious enough to still have a certain amount of alpha energy, kind of empire building, go out and fight and fuck and achieve and build and overcome, all that kind of stuff. I'm also really glad to feel it waning somewhat, and I'm less bothered about achievements and on a big scale, and I'm more interested in the smaller stuff, the subtler stuff. And I think it's a shame we don't celebrate deeper adult in our culture very much. Elders are not, there's something that, again, I think it was Michael Pollan talked about the downside of the psychedelic explosion in the 60s, which I've always been a huge fan of. I've never considered a downside, apart from a few people who jumped out of windows or that kind of mythology. But he was saying the downside was it created a division. It created youth culture, and it created, the old squares and the young hipsters. And that's all I've ever known. And I hadn't thought about that. There was a divisive aspect to it, and I think we need to bridge. If that still exists, which I think it does. I think we need to bridge that, because we really do need elders. We need people who've lived, and we do need role models. And we need a new kind of role model. I don't work with many people below the age of 30 because, as you say, they're still out there busy, empire building, and the wheels haven't fallen off for them. So I don't know if that's where it needs to go. I'm not volunteering to go and work in schools. I think the work needs to be done. But yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm entering into that phase. I certainly feel a bit more. I understand why you would invite me here, whereas a few years ago I would have thought, well, I've got nothing to say. I mean, my relationship with my partner, Maihua, because she's not done the kind of work I've done, she's always encouraged me to do podcasts and to speak out. And I'm like, why? Everyone knows this shit. And she's like, no, they don't. So I think it's hard to appreciate becoming an elder and recognizing the value of what we might have to offer. Because it's just mine and I take it for granted because it's my, being a therapist isn't a job. It's a way of being. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of existing. So sometimes a reminder that people don't think about these things or do these explorations is useful to think it's worth sharing. That's a long answer.
Jerry, always a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah, finally. Thank you. It's great.
Are you looking to level up in your life?
I didn't know what to expect. To be honest, I was blown away.
Just makes you see how every day you go and make yourself small and you compromise and you don't step fully into your potential.
We've been featured in The Guardian, Economist, and BBC. Rebel Wisdom New Masculinity retreats are about purpose, responsibility, brotherhood, and integration. They combine the best personal growth techniques from mindfulness to Jungian psychology, following the hero's journey.
Through the weekend, with such amazing support and my brothers around me, I've discovered an inner strength that I didn't know that I had.
It has been one of the best experiences I've ever had, and I'm so grateful that I did it.
For more information, check out our website and hope to see you soon.